Hello, I'm Scott Clover, and you're listening to the Intuitive Energy Podcast. This podcast series is about intuition, healing, and creating new energetic patterns that benefit you in your daily life. In my private practice, I help people heal from a diverse range of issues, including self-acceptance, trauma release, managing anxiety, emboldening self-worth, and creative expression. In today's episode, we discuss how joy and judgment can't coexist, why judgment can be draining, how to reorient yourself to joy, and the importance word choice can have on your mindset. Enjoy!
Carl Munson here in Portugal and Scott Clover, intuitive energy healer. I hope they're in New York City. Are you there, Scott, and how are you today?
Hi, Carl. I'm feeling good.
We've been having a great few chats, and I think the territory we're going into now is about joy and judgment, right? These are the sort of two keywords that are our starting point.
Sure. Well, joy and judgment, they don't exist in the same moment. So it's almost as if, as human beings, we judge ourselves in comparison to other people, wealth, health, education. There's anything in this world now we've constructed, we can judge ourselves against either someone else or ourselves. And when judgment is involved in a thought process, the joy has to be removed. They can't coexist. Do you follow me?
I totally do. And there's so much of it, isn't it? Endless judgment and occasionally such little joy. And this is such a simple thing and we forget it. Why is this? Why do we do that? Why are we doing it?
Conditioned thinking. If you look at now the way the Instagram is happening, there's really good people on these platforms sharing really amazing information. There's a woman named Johanna in Miami who does Healers of Light. And she shares so much amazing information online. And it's a pleasure to read her work. And then on the other flip side, you have people who are willingly self-promoting, and that's fine for them because that's their new profession. But if that profession is hoping that people who are considered less than them will look up to them in a certain way, it creates a form of judgment that is really straining our society. And it's straining our society because we judge individually. We judge ourselves individually, meaning, do you judge yourself or do you judge yourself through the eyes of others? Either way, it's a knife that cuts both ways.
And what came to mind when you were talking is this difference between people might be saying on Instagram, for example, and other platforms are available. We're not just giving that a sort of individual bashing, but it's quite a good example. But it's like, look how great I am, or look how great life is. Those are very different ways of creating a state in us, aren't they? Exactly.
And it's a different energy to absorb. While you're flipping through your screen or looking at your Facebook or Snapchat, whichever, it's a different energy to absorb. And it's a different energy that you have to process and eventually defend yourself against.
Yes.
And so defending yourself against something means that it exists. So what if you take a moment and say, oh, am I judging myself or others or myself through others' eyes in this moment? Why am I doing that? Are these people really better than I am? Am I as bad as I think I am because I'm not some ideal version of perfection? Because perfection doesn't exist.
Sure, but it's like quite a nice... I mean, we have it as an idea, though, don't we? And I suppose it makes a better target than a club to beat ourselves with. Is that what you might be saying?
Well, yeah, judgment seems to me like a never-ending ladder. Every rung is another rung leading to another rung of judgment that just keeps going and going until you're exhausted. Whereas I see joy as more like a swimming pool. You just sort of fall into it and it's quite enjoyable.
Yeah, and the ladder analogy, it's like, you're getting up there, aren't you? And you think, okay, I'll stop and have a look. And if you're on the judgment ladder, it's like, it's still...
You're in the middle. You're in the middle. Yeah, and you'll always stay in the middle. So it'll suck just as much to climb down as it would to climb up.
Yeah. And is part of your work helping people with this? So that distinction is being made and can be seen right from our conversation, that there's these positions of like judgment or you can be in the joy, or you can be in the judgment. You can't be in both, really, because as you judge, you lose the joy. And as if you're in joy, you could disturb yourself by starting to judge, but you might as well just stay in the joy. Is this what your work's about, is reconnecting people or reorientating them away from the judgment state into the joy state?
Yes. Yeah. There's a bon vivant way of living, whether you're wealthy or not wealthy, whether you have a huge family or a very limited selective group of people that you consider you're close to. Joy is possible. You just have to sit down and decide, where am I judging myself? Or where am I allowing my psyche to judge myself? And when you start to look it right in the eye, it takes a lot of power away from whatever you think the judgment is coming from. But you have to sit with it. And you have to acknowledge, oh, I gave someone my power away when I took their judgment upon myself and made myself think less of me.
And that happens a lot to us, doesn't it, as we grow up and get involved in this sort of conditioning process that is...
But it happens in friendship groups. It happens in high schools all over the world. It happens in every single family that has a power struggle. If one sibling is considered prettier or smarter or more this or less that, that can automatically create that sense in the individual of less than. And once you go out into the world, that dip or that divot of less than can get dug deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yes, and more practiced, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And this is...
Or automatic, actually.
Yeah.
It's more autopilot. It's more Pavlovian.
Yeah, and you don't even know you're doing it, right? And
correct.
That's my experience of working with you and what I think it is you do, and you're here to corroborate that or deny it. But you can see when people might be doing that when they can't even see it for themselves, right? It's like for a lot of us, the conditioning we've had is like being a fish, and it's the water you swim in. So it's not like you're making a conscious decision a lot of the time about how you see yourself and how you judge yourself or judge others in the world. And part of your gift, it would appear, is being able to see that on others' behalf, such that it can start to be unpacked. It can become more conscious and present to the person in their own perception, right? And then they can think, hold on, that's not working for me. I want to deal with that.
Yeah, I would say I have an ability or a skill set to sort of rise above what's happening and see it from a bird's eye view, like being in the top corner of a room and looking down at all the action, not just being in the action. And yeah, that insight allows me to explain it to the person or the individual who's yearning for more, who's yearning for release, who's yearning to feel better. Sure, I then see the pattern, and I can, using mostly metaphor, explain it back to them in a way that is graceful enough that their psyche accepts it.
That's a hell of a skill. And the aha moments must be plentiful when people suddenly get that, right? You must be in the presence of that quite a lot. Yeah,
there's a lot of bug eyes, a lot of deep breaths. Many a tissue has been given out over the years.
Yeah.
But that's all part of the catharsis.
Sure.
The realization that you're holding on to something that hurts you is a big aha moment for anyone, whether it's a minor thing or a major issue. When you realize that you have the ability to let go of it, that's an aha moment. Oh, and yeah. I help people, I guide people to those. Yeah.
I'm feeling that right now, you know, the release and sort of weightlessness, or the weight off of that level of realization. It's no wonder people cry and feel very moved by that. Now, connected to that then, and in your working with people, you mentioned the bon vivant state, which is such a lovely thing. And we were talking about judgment and joy earlier on. And there's this thing I wanted to ask you about, the sort of the balance, the ratio of, in healing work, some of it is about crying and difficulty, and some of it is joy, and you're leading people towards joy. Do you think some people have a lot of concern that it's going to be loads of hard work and it's going to be really painful, and not too much joy? And what would you say to them?
I'd say, well done for being prudent and not... And not thinking that it's, you know, it's not healing work the way the intrinsic healing, getting it out of your body, the somatic releases,
Hmm.
reconforming your subconscious, changing or shifting energy patterns. That's a lot of work.
Mm.
It's sometimes it happens instantaneously, and then there's a lot of fallout or clean up to do afterwards.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a more slow and progressive moment, but it doesn't do anyone very good to break your psyche into a new position. It's best to sort of encourage or bend it into the new position.
Oh, I see. As in, not like tough love boot camp style, but something a little bit more gentle and attractive, possibly to the another part of ourselves that might resist that.
Conducive to the idea that you want to keep going with it.
Yeah.
If the first time you go to the gym, you get a trainer and they make you overlift weights and overrun, and your body is sore for a week and a half, afterwards, you're not going to be too prone to go back to that trainer. You're going to try to find a more delicate way to get in shape over a longer period of time.
And that's part of the character of your work then, is not like Major Drill Sergeant shouting in people's faces to...
No, that's quite rare. That's quite rare that would happen.
But it can, right?
I guess it can. Sometimes there's yelling. It's generally not on my part. And that's wonderful. I mean, man, if you're frustrated about something and you live in an apartment building, yell into your pillow. Yeah. Just scream as loud as you can into your pillow and watch the energy move out of your body as you're yelling. Yes.
And make way for that catharsis, as you put it, and the joy. Because I want to come back to that, Scott. It's so important, isn't it? Do you think that's what we're really here for, is to have a joyous and beautiful life? And, the tools are emerging for us to do that. And it's such a weird thing that we're not there more often. What is going on with that? And do you think that is what life is really about?
Well, I think that there's a yin and yang. There's a give and take. There's a breathing or a respiration between those two concepts to keep us in balance. Beth Orton sings a song, "If I never saw the sunshine, I wouldn't mind the rain." It's a beautiful concept and sad as hell. So, things like that. How do you know joy exists? Because you know when it doesn't. And if you're numb or going around placating your psyche in such a way that you're not experiencing either side of it, then things get a little stagnant.
Yeah.
So I don't think joy is I think it would be really quite pie in the sky, rose-colored glasses to say, here's my 100% joyous existence. For anyone to say that doesn't seem quite valid. And that brings me to the idea of these extreme words. I like to remind people that very rarely should one be using an extreme word, all or nothing.
Yeah.
Those words create paradigms that can actually increase depression, because you're putting on a judgment of every single time I do something. Well, if you do it 8 times out of 10 and you say every single time I do it, then you just put sort of a disingenuous thought out into the world.
Yes.
Not on purpose. It's using your semantics. It's using the words you choose. But if you say every time I leave the house, I feel bad because I don't like myself. Well, a couple times you left the house, you thought you looked pretty good. So it really can create really polarizing thoughts for people when they use extreme words. The alls, the nothings, nevers, alwayses. Those words become traps in our psyche. That goes to conditioning. We condition ourselves by the words we choose because of the upbringing we had.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's how that sort of mental technology works, isn't it? Like I always or I never often precedes, doesn't it? That sort of conditioned and repetitive thought.
Yeah, it becomes a wah-wah moment, a sad trombone moment. And, sad music is appropriate, but sometimes you got to put on some Prince or some fun music, and you got to dance around as well.
That's some excellent value for people. If they catch themselves saying always or never, and they're sort of prepositioning themselves with their judgments, that's a nice little bit of insight for them.
Yeah, watch your words.
Yeah.
They're so powerful. Watch your words.
Okay.
You're creating reality. You're putting a vibration out into the world. that the world will respond to, maybe not right away, but if you do it enough times over and over and over, and that's also choosing more affirming words in the sentences that you say.
I love it when you give everyone a bit of homework. I mean, you give people value and insight as we're talking, and something to look out for, something to think about. You know, with that thing about the power of our words, whenever anyone stops to think about that, they know it's true. But again, it's like it's just so pervasive, isn't it? And we're so habitual in our lives that we don't necessarily live like that is the case. So
you really have to stop. You really have to stop and be quiet with yourself for a while and think about how you're communicating to the world.
Okay.
It can't just be a flippant moment, but you can notice over time, did I just say never? Did I say always? Did I say every single time? Am I using extreme words? And then how does that affect me? You can, try to count all the negative phrases that you say in responses to an affirmation.
Yeah.
If you say thank you and I say no problem, I just said the word no and problem.
Oh, wow.
We've heard this a lot of times. And so say thank you to me.
Thank you, Scott.
My pleasure.
Yeah, that's better, isn't it?
Isn't that neat? I felt good saying it. You felt good receiving it. But no problem comes across as a little,
God, I'm a bit shocked.
Energetically gruff.
Yeah.
Or it becomes somewhat demeaning.
Yes.
It can be self-demeaning. Yeah.
Incredible. So I want to actually take you back a little bit there, because you were saying you've got to stop. It can't just be a flippant moment. And I think we've said this before, haven't we? Is that people in a fast food, quick fix era, people do expect very fast results and don't necessarily put in the work. And you've said this before, I think, you've got to show up, you've got to do the work. And part of that is what? Stopping? Are you talking about meditation, or are you talking about just a little pause, or what?
Yeah, I'm talking about sitting for 15 minutes and turning any electronics off and thinking about the concept you want to see in your life. Don't think of it while you're driving or texting or watching a show. It doesn't have to be a meditative moment. It just has to be an insightful moment. Why am I acting like this? And then ask yourself the question and see where you get led to.
Yeah, because
be quiet with yourself and choose your words.
And it goes to the extremes again, doesn't it? Because when people start to think about being pensive and meditative, they go extreme and they think, like, okay, I've got to have complete silence, and it's got to be for 10 days, and I've got to have a digital detox, and it becomes very extreme and almost impossible.
Well, wouldn't that be wonderful if we all had the leisure to do that, and we don't? And it seems a bit extreme. Once again, if you haven't meditated before and you go on a 3-day silent retreat, that seems to me like you're going to the gym and overworking, and then you may snap back into your old patterns.
Tough unconditional love. Yes. Okay. So,
well, imagine it like walking into the ocean. You walk into the ocean to the point that you start to float, and then you can swim in any direction you want to. But your toes get wet first, and then your ankles, and then your shins, and then your knees and your thighs, and then that moment where you hit your genitals and you realize, oh, I'm in it to win it at this point. And then you can go off in any direction, and think of finding spirituality or finding yourself in that way. It's a lot more graceful than I'm going to dive in from the deep end and hopefully I know how to enter the water without doing a belly flop.
Yes, and for me, there's something to be said about how what's happening there is two things meeting, a balance point or a point of interest, rather than being at the other ends of the spectrum of, like, all or nothing. It's like that moment you say when you have the option to float and let the sea take over. That's the moment where it's suddenly very interesting as well, isn't it? And that's the magic, the creativity, the intuition is possibly a metaphor there, where you let something else into your life and you're letting go a little bit.
Right. And you're learning, I like nice things. I like wearing, a nice set of clothing, some type of clothes. And you honor yourself by doing that. But if you take it to an extreme or an excess, then you're not balancing yourself out in other areas of your life.
And so, yes, it's the power of subtlety, isn't it? And finding balance rather than going to extremes. I'm loving this, this what we're talking about today, the sort of the polarity which is so prevalent in our world and the extremity. And so you would think, well, that's where the power is, by being extreme. But actually, this is the power of gentle power, subtle power, where things
balance, as I say, respiration, air goes in, air goes out of our bodies. That's what keeps us alive.
Yes. Yeah. And the moment
we have good days and bad days, and we know they're good days because we've had bad days.
Yeah.
We don't hope for bad days. We hope for more good days.
And in that perspective, you don't have to beat yourself up for having a bad day, because after a while, you have the experience that there's a flow and good ones will come back, and then there'll be more bad ones, but you can be in that flow like you're in the sea.
Exactly.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Now, so what you're doing, the work with people is a deepening of this, is much more of it on a one-to-one sort of level. Can we remind people how you work? How a Scott Clover session works for people?
Sure. I see and sense energy patterns in and around people's bodies, patterns that create judgment, patterns that create stagnation, patterns that create a lack of self-worth. And sometimes I work with clients because they've had early childhood traumas, and sometimes I work with clients who are artists and want to just be able to express themselves bigger or more joyously. So it is that bon vivant energy that I like to bring to the sessions. Have people breathe.
Yeah, it's always good, isn't it? And one-to-one over the telecoms and in person, is that?
Yeah, in person in Manhattan. So if you're in the New York area, I see people in person in Lower Manhattan. And then I have clients all over the planet over the phone. 30-40% of my practice is phone work. Okay. And that's quite effective for the individual because they're in a safe space. So we can condition the space in advance to sort of be their safe space where they can feel a catharsis. Have these insightful moments, be in their bodies enough that a realism or a truth comes out that they've wanted to have exposed, but for some reason was just self-conscious about it. And that's, once again, the conditioning. If I heal, what happens next? I'm not as sad as my sister, right? So then you have to decide, oh shoot, if I heal myself, am I pulling away from someone in my family who also feels bad, or am I pulling away from a group of friends that we all share sort of a vein of misery about? And if you heal that, well, then your life will change. And sometimes that change is intimidating if you anticipate it in advance.
Incredible. Just as I thought we were finishing there, you open up another rich seam of inquiry and insight and awareness. Because in the extreme mind, it's like all conditioning is bad. We shouldn't condition children and we shouldn't mess them up. But actually, the more sensible, intelligent question is like, what sort of conditioning are we talking about here?
Right, and how much of it did we hold on to as faith, as truth, when in reality, if you look at it even under the surface, you realize, oh, I have to make my own decision about this. Yeah, I can stick with the mass belief or what the newspapers or what my social group is telling me, or I can look at it through my discerning eye because, the individual has their own set of belief structures. If you realize that those beliefs are limiting you and you're bringing that on yourself, then you realize, well, if I'm seeing it, I have the power to change it because I created it.
Yes, beautiful. And
I help people see those patterns where they obscure because sometimes their psyche or their subconscious knows it's going to be painful.
And from here on in, you can condition yourself in a positive way, having had that awareness and realization. Right.
And I'm fond of saying observing a pattern is 55% of the way of healing it or dealing with it. Because once you see it for what it is, the existing reality as it is, then you have sort of an idea of how to shift it. But if you're obscuring in your own subconscious why and how you act a certain way or react a certain way because it's too painful to deal with the truth, then you're going to stay in that position. So that's why, I guess, another reason why people come to see me is because I explain it back to them in a more graceful way, that it doesn't, the catharsis isn't painful enough to want to not do it.
Wonderful. So find out more or book a session, www.scottclover.com, SCOTTCLOVER.com. Scott, thank you so much. I just feel better talking about it.
Well, thanks, Carl. I appreciate it. You've been listening to the Intuitive Energy Podcast with me, Scott Clover. Thanks to Carl Munson for the great discussion and to Corey Tutt for the music you're listening to. In my private practice, I encourage people to heal what holds you back and feel better in your body. If you need more help with that process, I'm available for healing sessions by phone internationally. Visit scottclover.com for more information. Be well, and thanks for listening. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, and solely as a self-help tool for your own use. I'm not providing medical, psychological, or nutrition therapy advice. You should not use this information to diagnose or treat any health problems or illnesses without consulting your own medical practitioner. Always seek the advice of your own medical practitioner and/or mental health provider about your specific health situation. For my full disclaimer, please go to scottclover.com/disclaimer.